Welcome to the Edifice Complex, the property design and development podcast. Let your hosts Adam Muggleton and Robert Bean keep you up with who is innovating and doing great work, perspective on the adjacent possible, and challenges to the status quo.
Welcome to the Edifice Complex. I'm Robert Bean, your co-host, unofficial mediator, here with my colleague, official agitator, heavy emphasis on agitator, friend and Yoda to most everything to do with buildings, Mr. Adam Muggleton. Say hello, Sir Yoda.
Hello there. Right. So we got some whisperer on whisperer action going on today, right? This is like the Twitter nerd breakdance war between the house whisperer and the building whisperer here.
There you go.
And one of the things I hope we're going to talk about is the difference between a building and a house. Because I think a building is a house and a house is a building, but we'll come on to that, right?
Yeah. Most of our listeners understand the podcast is mainly focused on sort of a global property development with key leaders. But every once in a while, Adam, you and I find somebody that's in the forest who just has a voice, who's agitated with the status quo, won't shut up, has some really good words to say. And so we bring them in and give them the platform so that they can continue on the story. So welcome to the show, the House Whisperer, Nate Adams. Good to have you on.
It's really good to do this after we've known each other for years and years.
Yeah, right. So I think it was like 15 years ago or something like that we've been on each other's radar screen. It might even be longer than that, actually.
About that, 10 or 15, but it's been a while.
Yeah, and I always was amazed because you always put your money where your mouth is. You've been talking about crappy building programs, crappy building officials. But in all of your cynicism, you also stepped up and said, well, let's do something about it. And you developed some sort of systematic approaches. You wrote a book about what you think should go on. And then in 2024, you made a big, bold move and did something like completely different. So we want to hear like your story. Like, tell us what's happening.
I've been definitely a wild ride for a while here. I mean, I fell into this through selling insulation years ago, and then just started reading up on building science stuff and realized honestly that I worked for a fiberglass manufacturer and they were like, fiberglass is awesome, everything else sucks. And I'm like, it's usually not that black and white. What's going on here? And you start digging. Then the housing crash happened and my job disappeared along with my wife's 2 weeks later. So that was interesting. So I became an insulation contractor because I needed to make money today in 2009. Just kept digging, and in doing the insulation work fairly often, like not every time, but enough that it frustrated the hell out of the engineer in me. Somebody would say, I've got this problem, and I'd go insulate and air seal the house well, and the problem would get worse. Like, what's going on here? And the answer was HVAC on the other side. Like, you've got to have the two sides of the puzzle. And that's when I met my partner, Ted Kidd, now former partner actually, because I just disconnected from HVAC 2.0, which we've been building for a while. But Ted mentored me in how to diagnose these houses and build work scopes for them, which is going to be all really similar stuff to what you do, only minus a 0 or 2 or maybe 3, depending on how big the building is. Right. Let's get it sealed up halfway decent. Let's make sure that the HVAC has good capabilities for fresh air and filtration and dehumidification. None of this stuff is exotic. Like, how long have we known this stuff? What was it? Stiebrick's favorite, one of his favorite lines from Max von Pettenkofer is, if you have manure in a building, don't remove the odor by ventilation, remove the manure.
Manure, yeah.
We've known this crap. Like, that was 1879. It's not like, this is 2 years ago. This is 130, 140 years ago. And so started doing these comprehensive retrofits. We didn't call them deep because they really weren't. But it was what is it going to take to make a significant difference in this house or this building? that's likely to get us there without necessarily costing 100 or 200,000. So my average project was around 30 at that point, which then was a really impressive number. And now is like, whatever. Since COVID, man, the prices have just gotten stupid. But figured all that out and then realized there was no good consumer education at a 101 level and wrote the home comfort book. And it's funny, someday, Robert, I'll put out the second chapter, what I meant to be the second chapter of Comfort 102, which was basically ode to Robert Bean and IEQ. But it's really just kind of too advanced for most readers. But what surprised me was HVAC contractors really like that book because it turned out they are at the exact same technical level as homeowners. Because most HVAC contractors are wonderful technicians. They're good mechanics. They're horrible engineers. They aren't good at stepping back and looking at the entire house to figure out like why is this room screwed up? It's like, well, it's either building shell or it's not getting the BTUs there. So like it's heat in or heat out. That's always the issue, but they don't think about that. Yeah. And so it was this whole challenge of how do we teach people this? And is there a way to create a market for it and a supply for it? And energy auditors are not going to be it. They're too nerdy. You actually need more of a sales set of chops than you do technical, because generally you're just going to hit kind of hard. I mean, like Robert, I love your thing of if you've got a trim nail to hammer in, don't get the sledge out.
Right.
But sometimes instead of the trim nail, you may want just like a regular claw hammer. Like you can overkill it a little bit, like it's going in. And so a lot of the diagnostics on the houses, they don't need to be that exotic, that deep. You just need to make sure you're hitting hard enough to get a noticeable difference without tearing the house down, which happens on the far end, like the passive house side, which I love the passive house folk because they actually measure stuff and figure out what works, but it's never going to scale. It's too expensive. At least at the residential scale. So wrote the book, figured out that HVAC contractors were curious, that energy auditors weren't going to do it, installation contractors weren't going to do it. So let's look at HVAC contractors, and ended up building a whole new business model for them in HVAC 2.0. And then unfortunately figured out that no one cared. So a whole piece of software and a whole program out there. And it's a couple of different issues. I think 5 years ago, maybe it might have worked. But one of the biggest issues is you've got basically three classes of HVAC contractors in my mind. You've got the little guys that are oftentimes started by a technician, and they usually cap out at 2 or 3 million max because every project has to cross their desk. They're kind of like engineers. So they can't grow past a certain point. And then you've got like the $3 to $10 million tranche where you've got just like it's the owner is still running everything, but he's got a sales guy and a service department, and like it's beginning to be organized. It's reasonably well organized, but it's one person in control. And then you get to 10 million and up, and now you've got all kinds of people in there. So if you want to change an organization and like what it takes to actually make houses better, it takes a lot of change, and it needs to affect everything. It's sales, service, everything.
It's the E-myth, Michael Gerber, the E-myth, the entrepreneurial myth. It's exactly what it is. It's that story. Right?
Yeah, no, it is. It's just another way of getting at it. But the bigger companies are not going to make the changes they need to because there's 15 different people that all need to be pulling in the same direction at about the same time. So it's not something that you can change the larger organizations easily. So the 3 to 10 million is kind of a sweet spot, but you may have noticed that they were basically all bought up in the last 5 years by private equity. Yeah. So the ideal contractor size for what we were hoping would work literally disappeared in the last 5 years. It'll be back. We're already starting to see people fall out of private equity. I don't know if you guys are too. But all these private equity companies were counting on the insane market that we had for the last couple of years where everybody was stuck at home. So we're spending money on houses. And now we're back to high debt levels and high interest rates and so forth. So sales are falling off, and we're just doing a classic move from a replace market to a repair market. And these private equity companies aren't good at that because it requires being, well, let's see, at least decent technically. And they're not.
Yeah. Yeah.
They are good at selling shit and installing it the same way. Yeah, it's frustrating to watch all of that happen. But I do think the pendulum on private equity has probably hit the end of its swing, or it's really close to the end of its swing, and it's going to start coming back. But long story short, the whole time we've been trying to figure out, how do we actually make it so anyone who wants a comfortable, healthy home can get one? And the answer is still, well, frankly, go fuck yourself. Like, that's
Right.
kind of where it is. And it's terrible because, like, I don't view this as that difficult. Is the shell screwed up? Like, you need to understand, like, if it's really screwed up, you're probably going to need to deal with it. If it's just a little screwed up, you can probably HVAC the problems away. But you have to do some diagnosis and triage to understand where that house sits, and then what the homeowner wants, what their goals are, and what their budget is. And we have to get all those together. I don't view it as hard, but apparently it is. So
I just want to interject there that the difference between, like, when we have guests on, the difference between the guests that use 4-letter words and foul language is those that are in the trenches and have been there, and you have the battle scars, and you're like effing done.
Yeah. So
Like, just,
zero F's given.
Because there's a lot of, we've had some amazing guests on over, I mean, what is this, Adam? Our 5th
years.
6 years, 7 years, maybe. I don't know.
Is that really? Holy,
It's a lot.
and we have had some incredibly smart people who have managed to avoid the cynicisms and that whole world. But we've also had people on like yourself that, like you have put everything that I know, like, me just observing you from the outside, like, you have put everything into trying to change people's minds. And people that do that eventually, and if you just keep banging up against the wall and you don't see things changing, like, how could you not swear? Like, there's no other words, there's no other expression in the English or any language around the world that frustration, the only way to deal with it is to use a couple of good foul words strung together.
That's exactly it. Yeah, it's been just a tale of frustration and banging around and trying to find a path that might work, and still failing after all of these years.
Yeah.
You know what you're trying to do? What you're trying to do, Nate, is the equivalent of talking people out of Scientology.
Right? Yeah. But man, it's so simple in so many ways. Like, I came up with something that was nicknamed Badass HVAC. It was back in 2019. It's really simple. You need one high-end piece of equipment. But you can make it do 6 different things. And I think you guys will totally agree with this. You need load matching. So, like, the equipment output needs to match what the building needs as much as humanly possible, which is variable speed, right size stuff. Good filtration, keeps the equipment clean, keeps the space clean. We know that it matters for COVID at this point. We need it's funny when it's your own list and then you forget one of them, but load matching, filtration, dehumidification. You need to keep things dry. That's a problem for most of North America.
Yeah.
You want fresh air coming in. You want to mix. You want the air moving all the time at low velocity. Like, don't blow air on people. I've heard you loud and clear on that many times, Robert. And then humidification in some homes and some climates.
Yeah.
But we want houses to do that. But if you've got one nice heat pump system in particular that can actually do all the variation, that has reheat, dehumidification, electric reheat in it, which is common in commercial, but in residential, I get looked at like I have 2 heads. But I mean, you don't need an exotic thing. It's just you run big ductwork, a big filter, you run a duct to outside. It's not perfect, I grant you, but ERVs are expensive enough that oftentimes people go with crap equipment so they can afford the ERV, and I'd rather them get the good equipment with the duct to outside, given the choice. And so if we just get those systems in houses, like in my work, doing the house whispering, did about 50 projects. The really consistent feedback was, I can't believe this is the same house.
Yeah.
And all I did was apply physics. That's it. And I didn't even apply them that well at the end of the day, just well enough. And why is this so freaking hard to actually get out into the market?
Yeah.
Just amazes me.
Nate, a couple of questions for you. Like, where did this ability to step out of off the field, observe what's going on, right? Provide critique, and then jump back on the field and start to try to make change. Where did that come from? Inside your soul, your DNA.
I'm just fucking weird.
Because not everybody can do that. I mean, you made a great comment, which was that most contractors have the same knowledge level as homeowners.
Yeah.
In like the home performance side, the IEQ side, absolutely.
Yeah, like
they're good mechanics,
right?
And they're amazing mechanics. Like, I don't know if you've rode along with them, but like, I am in awe of what a service tech can do. Go into some incredibly screwed up system they've never seen before with all of these various weaknesses, and quickly figure out which part is wrong and get that sucker changed. Yeah. And the system's running again. Like, that is an amazing skill that I am terrible at. Yeah. But I guess I've always tried to think holistically, like step back, like, all right, if this is breaking, why did this break? It probably comes actually from my manufacturing background, because my parents had manufacturing businesses. And like, so if a cutting tool was breaking, A, why? And B, let's change it a couple hundred parts before it breaks, so that it doesn't take us down for an hour and it just takes us down for 3 minutes.
Yeah. Well, and I think part of it, and we've talked a little bit about this in past episodes, is that the building codes are very good at creating the rules for how you need to do things, but not why you need to do things.
Yeah.
And there's this huge disconnect and again, this is not a slam against contractors. On the contrary, without them, we would be screwed. But
yeah,
they know how to do things, just like you described. But why you do things is a completely different aspect of design, and part of it has to do with the terminology and how they see themselves. So we see contractors all the time saying, "Well, we designed this or we designed that." What they're saying is, "Well, we assembled the pipes, or we assembled the ducts, or we assembled the mechanical room." That's not design in the traditional sense of the design, in terms of looking at the needs of the occupants, looking at energy, that type of stuff. So being able to assemble equipment is assembly work. It's fabrication work. And we ought not to confuse that with design. And I think maybe one of the problems that we have in North America, not so much in Europe, and Adam, you can speak to this, but we need to get consumers to understand that the contractors coming to their job site are not designers.
No, they're mechanics, not engineers.
Exactly.
Or designer. Designer is probably a better word. As an engineer triggers a lot of people.
Yeah, look, there's
myself.
Yeah. There's an assumed level of competence from a house owner when a contractor arrives, but that contractor basically has what I call chauffeur's knowledge, thickness knowledge, right? And that looks okay if you don't know what you're doing. But if you do know what you're doing, if someone arrives with a checklist to Robert's house, good luck with that. You're going to get screwed, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So
better have answers.
Yeah.
But you're right. And then part of it is, again, like, I mean, when I think of the word like carpenter, carpenters can be framers, they can be cribbers, they can be cabinet makers, right? And so people when they say, well, the HVAC contractor's coming out, they assume that they're going to be talking about air quality, thermal comfort quality, sound, lighting, all that kinds of, but they're not.
No.
They don't.
Does the equipment turn on and off when the thermostat asks it to?
Yeah.
Yes.
Right.
Okay. Have a nice day.
It's even worse than that. Most mechanics or contractors who get in your house, the second they step in it, all that's going through their mind is, how fast can I get back out the door? Right? That is it.
No, you're actually really right on that. Service technicians in general are not people.
No.
They're just not. I mean, there's a lot of just asocial people. Like I've met just some weird technicians that were incredibly competent. But you talk to them and you're like, what's wrong with you?
They're on the spectrum, right?
Yeah, exactly. But that's what you want in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Well, and that goes back to where I was saying for kind of market transformation in the residential world, as important as technical chops are, they're actually significantly less important than the people side of things. And it's sales, but it's not sales.
Yeah.
It's just, all right, so here's what you told me bothers you. Here's what I think is wrong that's causing that. Here are the different options we have to fix that. This probably isn't going to work, but it's a Band-Aid. So like if we're just getting your system running today, we'll do that. But here's the whole spectrum to, if you really want to fix the problem, this is likely to, but also still not guaranteed. Like I don't ever want to guarantee anything. These are incredibly complex systems that I can't control. And then consumers do stupid crap. Yeah. There's no guarantees, but we can think in odds. But if we can just offer people a wide spectrum of basic to advanced and just step back and let them choose, and particularly, one of the other things you see is, and part of this is the contractor's fault for letting consumers do it to them. But so this will work, right? And then the contractor is saying, yes, that something will work. And it's like, it's a single stage oversized piece of garbage. It's not going to help anything. In fact, like with the efficiency standards, what I tell people now consistently, if you're buying basic equipment, your comfort's probably going to get worse. Sensible heat ratios are suffering quite a bit in the new equipment. And also, like, as we get more efficient and you get more output from the same unit, like that particularly happens with furnaces. You know, 100,000 BTU furnace that 60% only puts out 60,000 BTUs, which was actually pretty close to right sized. But when it's 98% efficient and you get 98,000 BTUs, that system is 60 or 70% larger in output than it was before. Yeah. And your comfort suffers. So we need, it's consumer education. Like, is it sales? Yes, technically, but it's more just helping people gain an understanding. And then you want to put the weight of the decision on their shoulders. Like, don't say this is going to fix it. Like, if you want to fix it, we're probably going to have to do this. And amazingly enough, when you put the weight on their shoulders, people make better decisions.
Well, there's two problems essentially we're talking about here, I think. One is a knowledge gap, right? Because it's messy and there's a lot of understanding needed. And two, there is a zero level service culture in property, commercial, residential, any level. There's no service culture, right? Yeah. So, you know, which is why you get people in and out like in microseconds. You know what I mean?
It is, yeah. Well, nobody wants to pay for it. And I understand. Yeah. Like, I'm guilty myself. But at least I do keep an eye on my filters. You know, like every 3 or 4 months I open it up and check, and I run media filters so I can get away with 3 or 4 months. And like one of the reasons I like a large media filter is if you only service it once a year, the equipment will probably survive. It's not great by any means, but I mean, if you've got a large media filter for that system, it can handle a lot of garbage.
Yeah.
But if you got a 1-inch filter in there and you leave it for a year, something's going to break.
Hey, I'm a 3-month rotation man myself, but again, I know what I'm doing, right? So
yeah, exactly. So
that's interesting though, because this sort of hits on why do we put up with this, right? So again, you know, this is my rant. I'm still not sure if it's a cult or consumer abuse with residential housing. I think it's both, right? Mm-hmm. We've been conditioned to like think a house is an investment and you will put up with anything because you consider you're going to make money out of it. So you bite your lip, right? And you just carry on because, you know, I'm going to sell this to some other sucker for more money. It's called the greater fool theory, right? Yeah. I buy a house for 100, 5 years later, I sell 150. I'm a genius, obviously, because I've made 50 grand. And, you know, boom. So you will put up with a level of BS at that level because all you're focusing on is that gain, right? Yeah. And it's still not horrible. It's warmish, it's coolish, right? So there's a cult aspect to that. But I think that's a form of consumer abuse, man. I made the mistake of buying a condo as an investment once 10 years ago in Canada, and I read the Condo Act. Oh my God, that is like legalized consumer abuse. They can make you move into a building not finished. They can make you pay money, whether that thing's on target or not. It is horrific at how bad that is. They can put all sorts of crap into that building and make you pay a massive service fee for it. It is legalized abuse. Yeah. And you know what? We go, thank you, sir. Please may I have another? Thank you, sir. Please may I have another? Please spank me harder on the bottom. with that condo act, right? So, we are the sort of architects of our own doom, don't you think?
Yes. So there's a couple of things to peel apart there. So from the economic standpoint, I'm also reminded, what was it, Ted Koppel? So one of the famous news guys, his boss came into the room in like 1968 or something and said, "All right, so the good news is the news department made money. The bad news is it will never be the same." And that's what we've seen, the 24-hour news cycle, and like everything's all screwed up. But news was considered a public service by the stations. And then it became for profit. And as soon as things become for profit, things get screwed up. It's also like as I'm swearing, but I think about the Bible verse of you can only serve one master. So if money is there as the chief master, everything else is going to get short shrift. Yes. And I think that's part of that. So to your point on the houses, a house really shouldn't be an investment. A house is a place to freaking live. At the end of the day, that's its fundamental function. Yeah. So like I think back to driving around in Detroit, which is land of 1,000-square-foot ranches. Like half the houses in Detroit are 900 to 1,500 square foot ranches. And they oftentimes have a garage in the back that's larger than the house because it's all these Detroit boys that, they've got a lift back there and they've got 4 cars in there that they built over years. And the house is landscaped like crazy because they decided to dig in. They didn't look at that as, oh, I'm going to turn around and sell this. Like, no, it's just a place to live. Yeah. Now we get to, well, this is just a step. And because of the low interest rates for years, we could do that. But now that interest rates went up, we're actually all going to be stuck in our houses for a while. Like not all, but far more than we have been in the past because you can't afford the new mortgage. To move up 300 square feet is going to fully double your mortgage cost or maybe even triple. So you're stuck where you are. So that part might help reverse what we've been seeing, where people pay more attention to putting higher quality stuff in their house. Yeah. But then on another piece of the points, we've been zoomed way out and coming back in, like maintenance. I've joked for years that the only safe assumption for homeowner maintenance is 0. They're never going to touch the equipment. So in whatever you're designing, try and design it so that it can run and not break for long periods without being touched. And that changes your design. Yeah. And that's part of why I like big media filters. I've got 1.5 ton systems at 2 of our Airbnbs. So we've ended up creating a bunch of fun Airbnbs here. We have a Harry Potter themed one. We have a board game themed one. We have Mothman, which is a monster like Bigfoot. I've electrified all of them because it just freaking makes sense. It's pragmatic to me. You want something that can load match. It needs to be able to turn down as much as possible. Heat pumps do that better than furnaces. And all the loads on all these houses don't require a furnace. They're all small. And so like a furnace is just, it's stupid. It's unintelligent to run in these properties. But 2 of those have a little 1.5 ton Daikin fit with a 20 by 25 media filter on it. I don't know if you know the residential numbers, but the filter drops 0.03 inches of water column on I didn't test both of them. I just tested one, but like that's nothing. I mean, absolutely nothing. The total external static pressure on that system is 0.13 when it's running at capacity, nothing. And I cannot hear that system when I'm upstairs ever.
That's how it should be. That is exactly how it should be.
IEQ, right? Yes. I don't want to know the system turns on. So even when it's running flat out, I have no idea that system's running.
Yeah, that's good.
You know what? If I was doing that project you just described, for me, and even for my dream house, it's probably going to look like this. I'm going to build one day, inshallah. That's God willing, by the way. It will have dedicated outside air system, radiant heating, and then VRF cooling for the odd few months that I need it, right? And that VRF cooling... You should
just come down here and you'll be like, screw that, I'm doing a 1 badass system and I'm done. Like why spend an extra $75,000 in HVAC?
Because I consider my house to be a luxury good, not an investment. So it's like
understand.
the BMW. If I want the leather seats, you know what? I'm having the leather seats. If I want the big wheels, I'm having the big wheels. But also that
I can understand.
level of comfort that would deliver. Obviously, there's an insulation level, like almost a passive house level of build I'm talking about here, right?
Yeah.
A high level, high integrity build with like high performance windows, like proper details, so it meshes together. You know, get an air test done, the whole thing. So that, because what I want in that house is comfort. If I feel hot and cold air blown at me, so where I come from in the UK, that means social housing, right? Yeah, true story.
There's the cultural aspect to it.
Yes, because houses are a culture. This is the other thing with housing. In our region, it's a cult, right? When you're a dude, and it's mostly a dude thing, you know, I got my Porsche, boom, my wife calls that a penis substitute, right? It's a statement. It's like having the fastest horse, the nicest car. And houses are also in that thing. A house is like a nice watch. It's like a nice car. It's an extension of your personality. It's a status symbol. It's a statement, right? It has a cultural phenomenon. So where I come from, those live in wooden built houses with felt roofs, and poor people have hot and cold air blown at them, right? I moved to North America. It is the complete 180 of that. And it blew my mind for about, it took me 2 years to get over that.
Yeah, the cultural differences, it's one of the things I love about just traveling in general.
Yeah.
I mean, particularly with a healthy dose of building science, like going to India and Nepal and you see all these black tanks on roofs. That's the hot water system.
Yeah.
Like, and you know, if I wasn't into building science, I probably wouldn't notice that.
Yeah.
Or the thing that blew my mind the most was going to San Diego and seeing a package unit sitting outside on the ground, and the ductwork is running up and over the roof, like an 18-inch duct or something like that, running up and over the roof and then into the house on the other side. I'm just like, you're running it over a roof that's routinely running 140, 150 degrees when it's sunny out.
Yeah.
Like, this is just insane.
Thermal overlap, right?
Yeah, like, so you just, but every place has its different places or different strengths and weaknesses. In the Colorado area, they run a ton of rooftop units. So it's a package unit, but it's sitting on the roof of the house. And you know that thing's choking because it has barely any ductwork to run. So those systems tend to not last super long.
Yeah.
Plus you're putting it in, again, a very hot environment. When on the ground, it'd be 20, 30, 40 degrees colder. So I don't know. It's very interesting when you travel, the different things you see, and then the cultural differences. Like I also hear a lot about heat pumps in Norway, and we traded houses with some Norwegians, and they had one heat pump, and thank goodness they did, because it was a heat spell there. It was 90 degrees, 30, 35 C, and most of the country doesn't have air conditioning.
Yeah.
And they only had that in the living room. So we dragged mattresses into the living room because it was 90 degrees during the day. Like, it was hot. So I wanted to sleep. But they run a ton of resistance there, which is not talked about very often. And then they have hydropower that at that point was like 10-cent kilowatt hours, which is like a third or a quarter of what most of Europe was paying at the time.
Yeah.
So yeah, of course you run everything on resistance. Who cares? It doesn't matter. Like, you just we'll put up another dam and make more hydro. No big deal. So yeah, the cultural differences and the geographic differences are always interesting to me.
The Edifice Complex will continue in just a moment.
Are you struggling with paperwork, spreadsheet overload, and project management? Then Blue Rhythm is the solution to help you. Streamline your commissioning and project management process. Go paperless, increase efficiency, and save money. Blue Rhythm is commissioning and project management software by practitioners for practitioners, adapting to your workflows and processes, and doing things your way. Blue Rhythm provides painless and fast onboarding by bringing your existing workflows, forms, checklists, and issues logs into Blue Rhythm for you. You can use their pre-built templates to customize your commissioning workflows. And Blue Rhythm can fully handle the transition from your current software platform. Blue Rhythm is Secure, scalable, and reliable, backed by amazing support, and accessible 24/7 on any Windows, iOS, or Android device. Why are you still using paper and hard-to-control spreadsheets? Start your free Blue Rhythm account today at bluerhythm.com.
And now, back to the show.
When we were in Vietnam, they were building many hydro plants, but they're also suffering from low rainfalls. So, and that's this going back to climate changes of consequence. Well, yeah, you can put in all the hydropower plants you want, but if you don't have the reservoirs to drive the turbines, right? And it was like both Adam and I, we've traveled a lot. Adam, I mean, I don't know how many countries you've been into. It's insane. But I noticed,
Collect them all.
Huh?
Collect them all. He's got to be getting close.
Yeah, right. But vernacular architecture teaches you a lot. And when I think about last year in particular, because we were in the UAE, Oman, Philippines, Indonesia, and Vietnam, and looking at how those ancient civilizations survived without refrigeration-based cooling systems, or dehumidification systems.
Yeah.
And they have the model that North America and other parts of the world need to survive in the future as we see these changes happening. Even here, like I'm not actually in Calgary today, we're actually up in Edmonton, but insane temperatures up here, that's just debilitating heat. And Adam, who did we have? It was, oh man, what was her name? She was from the UAE and she was talking about.
Oh, Holly Chant.
Holly Chant, yeah. Sorry, Holly, if you're listening to this, I forgot about. But I always remember the interview that we had with her because she talked about the influence that American architecture has had around the world and how it's effed up societies.
Yeah,
it's a cultural export, right?
It is.
Yeah, not a good one.
Not
McMansions are us.
And and it's funny when you travel and you come back to North America and you realize, like, America, or
no A. Take the A off. No more America.
Well, we have the same thing. We have the same thing in Canada. Except you can't take the A off Canada because it doesn't sound like Canada anymore. But if the rest of the world actually behaved as we behave, we would be effed. Like we would be screwed. I have this image in one of the slides I used to have, and it was a resort in Asia, and it was jam packed. Hundreds of thousands of people around these pools, and you could see a little bit of the water, but not all of the water, just a little bit of the water. But the rest of the grounds was just covered by people sunbathing.
Sea of flesh. Yeah.
Sea of flesh, right? And the analogy I made was, well, let the water represent oil and gas, and let the people in the pool represent North America using oil and gas. And then as Canadians and Americans, then ask the rest of the world to jump in the pool with us.
Yeah.
Like, what would happen?
No, it's not numerically. None of this works, right?
None of this. No, it doesn't. So
I'd actually push back on that. I wouldn't have a few years ago, because I have to say, like, in moving to electrification, I don't really care about efficiency that much anymore. Although the thing is, like, if you do a job well, like you follow Robert, your design for people, good buildings will follow. If you do a good job, places are just efficient. They just are. Like you can't help it. But so for one, I stopped caring as much about efficiency. But also with renewables coming online, I mean, solar is really cheap in most of the world to put in, and now batteries have gotten very, very cheap. I'm actually not super worried about the energy side. And then, I mean, Robert, you taught me exergy. It took me forever to get my freaking head around it.
That's how I bond with Robert.
Okay. Yeah. But I mean, we only need about 40% of the power or the energy that we do right now, because the rest gets turned into smoke and heat.
Yeah.
Like it's not useful energy. So I'm actually not nearly as worried about that side of things anymore. And I mean, things are going to get hot. And as everyone gets to where they have more money in the world, refrigeration is going to continue.
It's going to grow. It can only grow. Refrigeration is going to grow exponentially.
Yeah, the challenge is how that electricity is generated. And, you know, I mean, so here in Alberta, where I am from, and Saskatchewan, and those are the two provinces. And basically, Adam, you know this. I mean, in Canada, roughly 84% of our energy power is actually through renewables.
Yeah.
Except in Alberta and Saskatchewan. And our provinces, our governments will promote extracting the last cubic millimeter of vapor, gas, hydrocarbon vapor out of the ground before they'll jump onto renewables. Now, there are some other parts of the world that will use hydrocarbons to generate their electricity. Mm-hmm. China is still one of the world's worst, right, in terms of coal plants. We actually shut down our last coal plant. I think got shut down in Alberta here like a month ago or something like that.
Okay.
So we are making the shift, but still, if people used oil and gas the way that we use oil and gas globally at the same ratio, it would not be good.
But that journey is happening, Robert, right?
Exactly. And so and what's interesting is that, but why people do it in different parts of the world is completely different than why we do it here. I rented a motorcycle when I was in Indonesia, and I went into this was in the Philippines, actually. We were on an island, and I rode into the back villages because that's where I like to be. I want to see the villages, right? And as I'm driving on the bike, I'm noticing like every small little hut had a little solar collector on it. Every one of them. Like there wasn't a hut that didn't have a solar collector on it. And I thought, wow, what an amazing civilization culture here. These people are concerned about energy. And then it dawned on me, no, Robert, you dumbass. These people just want to light up one light so they can have coffee in the morning when it's dark, or to charge up their cell phones.
Yeah.
This wasn't about anything other than just trying to make life a little bit easier for them.
And that's what goes on. So I think I read the stat, someone can fact check me on this. There are more than 300 brand new coal-fired energy power stations being opened in China this year alone.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Right. So it doesn't matter if America, Canada, the UK, Australia, and New Zealand just fall below the sea and disappear. Yeah. Nothing's going to change here.
There's some truth to that, but the other thing is they are building everything. So, I mean, for years, Germany had the most solar of any country in the world, and they overpaid like crazy. And then I don't remember who was next, who passed them, but now China has passed everyone. So, I mean, fundamentally, we're sending a huge amount of our manufacturing there, and they need a crap ton of power, and economically, people. Yeah,
we export our problems and pat ourselves on the back, right? We export our pollution and externalities and go, oh, we're so good. Good job, boys.
We pushed it down the hill. I mean, like here in West Virginia, like you find garbage on hills all the time because people just wouldn't throw it out. They just like everything's a hill here, so you just push it over the hill. So like a neighbor boy just pulled 31 glass bottles out of the hill right behind the house the other day. He was like, oh, these are cool. Like, there's a bunch of antique bottles in there. So to a degree, we're doing that. But also the economics are flipping. I mean, where I'm sitting here, this actually is what's called a coal camp.
Right.
So the Brooklyn coal mine is right around the corner here. We ride our bikes by it. And this was coal country where I'm sitting here in West Virginia, southern West Virginia. The economics have not been good for it. Like it cracks me up when I hear like, oh, green killed coal. Like, no, fracking did. Yeah. You can frack natural gas and the fuel cost is like a third of what coal is. It's just economics. So the at least on the power and the energy side, where like on the home electrification side, I'm very pessimistic, to be frank. But on the energy side worldwide, I'm actually not worried because the economics have tipped so heavily that those coal plants are very unlikely to see end of life still running because the economics have changed. Like in the US, it is cheaper to buy and buy land and build a solar field with batteries than it is just to operate a coal plant, not build it. And with that major economic flip, electrification and the move to renewable energy and cleaner power in general, is it perfect? No, like you'll get into burying windmill blades and what do we do with the solar panels and stuff?
Oh yeah,
but everybody
depends where you draw that
other
boundary, right? It works or doesn't work.
Yeah, well, exactly.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, it's just math.
Yeah.
I say that math wins. It just takes longer than it should.
On the money side, though, I want to circle back to something you said earlier. So housing is a cult, I think, right? Which is why you get a lot of delusion there. But also, it's about money, right? So there's a sort of like a belief that it's an investment. Let's not go there, right? But also, house prices basically are determined by the most important price in the world, which is the cost of money, interest rates, right? My first mortgage was a 21% interest rate. I can get you around that. I'm old, by the way, right? That was the back end of the 70s, early 80s. But
my parents
cost
too
matters, right? Now, if we want to move housing to be a high-end consumer good, you made a statement earlier, passive house cannot scale. Is that because of cost?
Largely, yes. Well, so there's costs, but there's also the contractor base to do it.
Right.
It's just
two constraints there, right? Cost and skill.
Yeah. And it's hard, well, and then it's hard to make money doing that work. So
because you got to do it properly.
Exactly. Yeah. Which requires more training, which requires paying more, which drives the cost up some more.
Yeah.
Now in multifamily, I love passive house.
Right.
Because you can make the numbers work. You've got much less shell area. You can share HVAC systems and water heat, things like that. There's ways to make it work. Single family homes, no. I mean, for years when I first started into this field, the total number of passive house certified homes in Ohio was 1 that had been paid for by the Natural History Museum. No economic sense whatsoever.
Yeah.
And I ended up going into that house, and you two will find this funny. The owners are like, man, when we cook, we have to open the windows because the fumes get stuck in the house. They're like, no, we're absolutely not doing a hood. We're going to let the ERV do it. Like the ERV is pulling like 20 CFM out of that room.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You need it right over the stove, and you need it moving like 100, 200, maybe 300 CFM to actually be effective.
Yeah.
And they just weren't. So they had issues. So I was in that house. And I don't know, it's just, it's wild. Like I'd love to see that go further. And like years ago, I was like, oh, I want to build a passive house. And then over time, I've come to think a lot about what I call reasonable but effective. So what is something that we can get average talent to do well enough to work and be effective? And like oftentimes you can do that for marginally more. You're talking 20, 30, 50% more than something basic, but it's not 500% more. And that's the challenge. Like in the passive house, I hear people like, well, we can get it down to where it's the same cost. I'm like, are you factoring in the $90,000 of design work and verification that's also in there that ends up making it uncompetitive? Like whenever I've seen the numbers on it, I've just been like, yeah, but you're hiding that. It's like a government budget. It's balanced. Yeah, don't pay attention to the $2 trillion over there that we printed.
Right.
Doesn't passive house become an argument for modular or standardized construction methods?
For modular, I could see that, but actually one of my good friends, Bill Spohn, did that.
Yeah.
But it was a struggle on a lot of fronts for it because I was quite involved. Like I wanted him to do a different HVAC system than what he did, and there were too many cooks in the kitchen. And I'm like, I'm going to get in fights that nobody benefits from, so I'm just going to back out. So it's a challenge on that front. Is it possible? Yes. But like what was wild was that when he had the section set, it still had a quite high blower door, like higher than all of the ones that I'd helped a builder with. But he had the challenge of he couldn't find anybody who wanted to site build passive.
Yeah.
So there's all of these factors. And then the heat pump got installed wrong and it had a refrigerant leak and it ate the compressor the first winter. He's watching his energy use and he's like, why is it so high? It's like, because the house is running on resistance, not the heat pump.
Yeah.
And it had roached the compressor. It was like it was leaky in one mode, but not the other, which I don't fully understand. But anyway, there were all of these challenges, and it's just not scalable. Where, like on the residential front for HVAC systems, yes, the communicating stuff is more complicated as far as what the equipment is, and you want to have a little more understanding in some ways on the controls, but they run on 4 wires, sometimes 2. And like the Carrier Infinity stuff that I like, when you hook it up, it goes out and it figures out what it's hooked to. Oh, I got a 10 kW backup strip, or I got a 3-stage 5, 10, 15. I got a 3-ton outdoor unit. I've got a 2.5 to 4-ton air handler. Boom, boom, boom. And it sets it up halfway decently.
Right.
Like, it's not a great commissioning by any means, but it's not terrible. Where on single stage stuff, if you don't flip the dip switches in it to change the airflow, which almost never happens, those, you put in a 2.5 to 4-ton air handler and they come set to 4 tons. And then you pair it with a 2.5 or a 3-ton outdoor unit, and it's trying to run that 4 tons of airflow. So it's loud and you don't get dehumidification. Yeah. And then oftentimes you're going to eat the system early for multiple reasons. So I actually like the good communicating systems because they aren't any harder to actually install, and they self-commission okay. Like I love tweaking them. Like I've got all of my tweaks, but even my tweaks, now that I know what they are, 15 or 20 minutes on the thermostat and I'm done. It's not a big deal. I do it with homeowners in about 45 minutes with me on video and them pushing buttons, and I explain to them what they're doing. In 45 minutes, I can be done. So these things aren't that hard to do, but how do we find these reasonable but effective paths that average technicians can do well enough, and that the price isn't so high that we can build value with homeowners to spend the extra money?
It goes to your first point and make it simple so no one has to mess with anything, right? You want it as plug and play as possible.
Yes, exactly.
Is building code the answer to try and increase the sort of like build quality and efficiency of these buildings? Like every 5 years, the building code says, right, you got to get to this thermal performance and this thermal performance.
Let me tell you a story. So one of the fellows who works for Building Performance Association lives not far from here and actually has a campground. And Zave and I are friends. And he invited me to come to a builders meeting close to here. And we were talking about moving from 2009 IECC energy code to 2015. And then he showed me what the wording was. So we're moving to 2015, but in the next paragraph, but we're only enforcing 2009. Like blower doors aren't exactly. Yeah. No one enforces blower door. So in my experience, if you have a compliance path, it will fail.
Yeah.
Because you need inspectors that actually know what the hell they're doing, and they don't, as a rule. You've probably seen the meme of, I don't know how to do your job, but this book says you're doing it wrong. Like whether or not it may be wrong, because like oftentimes the contractor understands the why and did something differently because that's what that site and that project needed. So they're still achieving the goal, but it doesn't technically check the box. Because I do that. Like I'm a spirit of the law person. I hate the letter of the law. We live in West Virginia in part because my wife and I hate rules. I want to do things well. Don't tell me what to do.
So you in the hills, right, have a distillery, mate?
Oh, hell yes. Yeah, there's not many stills around here anymore, but there were. You'd get shot around here if you wandered onto the wrong property. Like, not kidding. Now you're more likely to get mauled by a bear because they are around here, but also not aggressive. But yeah, how do we solve all of this stuff? And it's like the compliance paths don't work. Here's another example. In California, every HVAC replacement for homes is supposed to follow Title 24 and get full design, J, S, D, all that. and pull a permit. Anecdotally, because these are all numbers like you can't get. Like I love when people are like, so what are the failure rates? Nobody's going to admit it. Like this is not something you get funding for a study for. Like all we have is anecdotal data. But anecdotally in California, 10% tops of residential HVAC replacements are done with permits.
Just 10%.
Really?
10%.
It's that low?
Yes. That's what I hear anecdotally from people in California.
Wow.
So like we need people to understand the why. We need homeowners to understand the why, and we need to build value. So that this is the thing that makes me really depressed about residential electrification is doing residential work well is going to cost more, period, full stop. It's going to be a good chunk more at install. And the operating costs, they're similar, like, but people argue over that. It's like, it's $200 a year. Look, if $200 a year is going to break you, and that's what most houses that I've modeled and watched are in the range of, if $200 a year is going to break you, you shouldn't own a house, you should be renting so that you have predictable housing expenses because you're obviously operating too close to the edge. But people freak out over that sort of thing. And it's like the operating costs don't matter. Like, and really consistently what you find is when you install a nice system, people stop caring about the energy savings. They're like, my house is really comfortable. I really don't give a damn if it costs extra.
Yeah.
Thank you. Again,
but you have to build that value to buy it. That's the problem.
Let's workshop this a bit, right? If your house is a dual handbag, it's a consumer good, right? You want it to be comfortable, serve you, great IAQ, great EEQ, and also look good and make me feel good in the neighborhood, right? That's basically what's going on here.
But we have to build that value. That's the hard part.
We're at 4 minutes for the end of the hour. Nate, you said you had a hard stop. So
yeah.
Let's start winding this up. We could have another episode because there's a lot of things to unpack.
You might have to bring you back for part 2 here, I think.
That's right. Yeah. So,
well, we could do that. And actually, I don't have the hard stop now. My daughter said she didn't sleep well enough to want to go to camp today. So I'm a little bit more flexible, but
reprieve.
It probably doesn't suck to do a second part in a little while anyway.
Yeah. So Nate, I have a question for you. As one of our sort of last wind-up questions, if you had an opportunity to stand in front of Congress in Washington to talk about energy policy, and you had 5 minutes, you don't have 5 minutes here, but if you had 5 minutes there, what would you say?
Why the hell are we making air conditioners? They're stupid. It's like buying a car that doesn't have reverse. When for $300 more, you can get reverse.
Right, a heat pump.
You'll never get in a Christmas car from Carrier or Train. You know that, right?
Well, no, they'll love it. I'm going to sell them a lot more stuff. Because the other thing is, like in colder climates, like, well, I don't totally live in cold climate anymore, but you two do, and I did in Cleveland. An air conditioner really only runs about 3 months a year, maybe 4, something like that. If you do a heat pump, it can run all 12. Like it's not going to be the whole time, especially when it gets really cold. But there's plenty of times when the temperature gets into where a heat pump's going to make sense to run, even if you have a hybrid system, which is mostly what you're going to find. And actually, there's been a bunch of policy that's actually considering doing that. I have no idea if it's going to go anywhere. But if AC to heat pump happens, it's actually going to happen in Canada. I don't think it's going to happen here. The policy houses are like, we can't do this because of this rule. And I'm like, I mean, on the policy front, the other thing that I would tell them is, can we send the IRA heat pump programs into the sun? Because they don't help. So like I knew this, and there actually was a study on it by CLASP and RAP. And they found that the IRA programs are going to increase heat pump penetration in the US by 2%. Would you like a cookie for $10 billion? Actually, it's going to be more than that. It's $9 billion between the two state programs, which are absolute clusters. I had a friend put it, and I can't remember exactly how he said it, but like, if I have to explain it and it makes things worse, that sucks. And so like the IRA programs, like I want to bring it up with clients so that they're aware of it, so that they don't find out later, oh, you didn't tell me about that, and I would have done this instead. But now I moved price and equipment selection to the beginning of the sales process when that should be firmly at the end. Like we need to explore what you want. And then at the end is when we talk about price and equipment. But now we've moved that up front. And then the federal program, it wants good cold temperature performance, which might have tracked back to me. I was like, well, yeah, if I were king, maybe I'd just require that it's got 70% of output at 47 degrees at 5, something like that. And that's what the freaking rule is. So I don't know if it was me, but I suggested to someone who might have suggested it to someone else. So it might be in part my own damn fault. But to do that, the cheapest way to do it is with a mini split. And mini splits generally have horrible sensible heat ratio settings. And if you can't vary the temperature of the coil, you can't dehumidify better. So they run warm coils, but they're really good at cold temperature performance. And they're also pretty cheap. So we're going to see a whole lot of these systems. I don't know what the percentage is going to be, but if the cheapest way to meet it is with a mini split outdoor unit paired to a dumb American air handler that can't vary anything really, that's good at cold temperature performance, but terrible at dehumidification, we're going to make houses and people sick. Like in my projects, the thing that I fought harder than anything else was holding humidity in check. That's part of why I became such a big fan of reheat.
Yeah, because people don't understand humidity's effects on everything, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, and I mean, all the efficiency when you're aiming for higher SEER ratings, how do you get that? You ignore the dehumidification because it's not factored in. I mean, it's all of us want one perfect metric, and there's never one perfect metric.
No.
And whatever metric we choose ends up screwing something else up. So, yeah, let's make all air conditioners into heat pumps, and let's pay attention to sensible heat ratios.
So I've got one final question for you, and it's a yes or no answer. Pretend I've got a large gun to your head here. You're in America, right? So
there's plenty here. Yeah.
Right.
We have more guns than people by a long shot.
Is a house an investment or not? Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay.
According to the market as it stands right now, yes.
Do you see your own house as an investment?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
The part 2, we'll have to have that debate.
Yeah, you're not alone in that thought. I can tell you that.
Yeah. Well, hear me, Adam, that I don't like that. But if I have to pick one of those answers, that's my answer.
Yeah, that's all right. That's why I suggest a lot of things. It forces you to take a side, right? But yeah, I understand why people say yes to that as well. And there's a lot of objective anecdotal evidence that says it is, right? But yeah, I must admit I'm on the other side of that. But yeah, I get it. Absolutely. All right, that's good, man. So look, that's coming on the show. That was a good sort of nerd out there. A whisperer nerd out.
And by the way, I know you guys were talking here before the show started about stealing the terminology, but someone told me if you steal from enough people, it's called research.
Exactly right.
Well, Robert, you know what R&D really stands for, right?
No, what's that?
Rip off and duplicate.
Yeah.
That is so true.
So I consider it a high form of flattery. If I was first, it's flattery. If I wasn't, then I apologize for robbing your name. And I'm not sure which way around it goes. Okay, listen, we will do a part 2 later in the year, maybe, or sort of early next year, because residential doesn't get enough conversation, right? And one way you change things is by talking about it and putting it out there. So this is an important subject. Thank you for coming on. Yeah, it's really interesting to hear your take on it. You know, the American market's so huge. If you can move the needle there, you're making a difference, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Thank you, gents, for having me.
All right.
I do appreciate it.
Thanks very much, man. Take care.
Cheers.
Bye.
The Edifice Complex will continue in just a moment.
Are you passionate about the built environment? Do you want to learn from the industry's most inspiring, intelligent, and accomplished professionals? Then the companion to this podcast, Wisdom of the Property Crowd, is just the book for you. From Edifice Complex podcast interviews, This book distills the critical thinking, insights, and ideas of some of the property industry's most accomplished and respected practitioners. Each chapter is a synopsis of an hour-plus interview, capturing the takeaways and insights, including diagrams and images to help explain concepts and ideas. There's also a brief bio about the interviewee and a QR code linked to the podcast episode for those that want to explore further. These are the mentors you wish you had in college. Wisdom of the Property Crowd by Adam Muggleton. Available on Amazon worldwide.
And now, back to the show.
Oh, it's good having Nate on. Like I said, I've known him for like at least 15 years. I'm pretty sure it's somewhere that he's on the radar screen. And what always impressed me was he was vocal. He was against the status quo. It was like, I'm going to do what I can to shake shit up.
Yeah.
And draw attention to just how screwed up we do things on the residential market in North America. And anybody that comes across my radar screen, I love them.
Is he the Han Solo of residential? Flying around and fighting the rebel, fighting the Death Star.
Maybe he's certainly one of them. Yeah.
No, it's interesting. He brought up some really interesting points there, and it also like hearing you guys talk about like the US market. You talk about your trips abroad recently and looking at the vernacular architecture. It really does make me realize how local and cultural housing is, right? Because my ideal house is not everybody's ideal, nobody's ideal house, it turns out. But he was talking about like electrifying things, and I agree with that. But then I'm thinking, again, this because I've done work on mission critical buildings. If we go all electric, for me, that's a single point of failure. Whenever I hear someone say, "I'm electrifying everything," I think, "Oh, single point of failure," and that's going to go great. Because I've done data center work, and that is the sin of all sins, single point of failure. There's a whole sort of subclass of engineer who just looks at that thing and finds the single points of failure, right?
Yeah.
And it's normally some $50 bloody circuit in the middle of nowhere in that building that could take the whole thing down, right?
Yeah, totally, yeah.
So I agree with electricity. And the other thing with electricity is like the transmission losses. Yeah, 1 kilowatt heater is a 1 kilowatt heater. But there's like 30% transmission loss at least, right, from generation.
Yeah.
So what do you think of this? I'll ask you this, right? Someone said to me, really, what we got to get to is green power generation. And it doesn't matter what you do at the other end of it.
Yeah, so that's a soul ripping question, right? It's like one of the last projects I worked on before I shut my engineering business down was 2 passive houses in Vancouver. They were both 10,000 square foot or bigger. It's like like the two words don't go well together. 10,000 square foot passive house, right? Or, well, we're going to produce power that's renewable, so therefore, what does it matter if you've got an all glass building? Yeah.
So again, this is why I'm a big fan of the balanced embedded versus operational carbon thing, because it deals with that, right?
Yeah.
So if you've got, let's say you just blessed, you live in a place where it's all green power, right? So what we do, right? But then if you're building a 10,000 square foot glass box, you're still an asshole. Because the embedded carbon, the materials, the waste, the pollution, right?
It is, and it's you're solving a solution that doesn't require power, but you're solving it mechanically or electrically because you have access to power and there's no consequence to it.
Consequences. That is the key word there, right?
Yeah.
So this is why I think the environmental sustainability movement, if we're calling it that, has moved beyond them 2 words. Because when you start looking at embodied versus operational carbon, then the equation has to be balanced. It's never balanced properly, but it's balanced as best as it can be, right?
Right.
And then because it brings in all that other stuff, like source of power, materials, operational lifespan, right? Yeah, really, let's face it, most buildings, the big number is the operational lifespan of that building. If it's 25, 30, 40, 50 years, by the time you get to the end of the life of let's say a 30-year building, the cost of construction is just like, it's nothing. It's a rounding error at that point, right?
Yeah.
But we don't talk about that.
No, we don't. And then it goes actually back to one of the questions or statements you said about single point of failure. Yeah, you can build a 10,000 square foot house and go all renewables without having the energy consequences.
Yeah.
But you traded off electrical mechanical solution for passive solutions. And now that single point of failure is a big system.
Yeah.
Versus if you said, okay, well, we're going to solve more of the problems passively, better insulation, reduced glass, better performance, tighter buildings, blah, 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 then the size of your single point of failure becomes smaller. Now,
right. So you're talking about resilience here. So when he was talking about that, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I think the design strategy, for a better word, is reduce, recycle, renewable, right? So renewables at the bottom of that list. So reduce loads through passive house, good construction, good materials, right? Recycle energy, right? Heat recovery units, things like that, right?
Right. Yeah.
And then go local, right? So if you're going to go electric, go local solar thermal heating, local PV. And yes, you'll bring electric in as well, but at least there's some redundancy and resilience in that.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Which is what you saw in the vernacular architecture, right?
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
But we're not thinking like that. We're going full bore Western. Yeah, give it big. I can bring in all the renewable energy and no failure scenario planning or resilience at all, right? We're so arrogant in the West. Yeah, we're so
Adam, you're so right. It's like watching a bunch of drunk rugby people, fans at a match.
Yeah.
Like, it's just like hit it with everything you got and just make it like this should be hand-to-hand combat. And
it's like, release the choppers, drop the ball.
Right. And yet, and other parts of the world, they're just way more chilled, way more, and I remember when I was in Oman and one of the guys was talking about the currency of energy, and it's a really chilled society. I mean, they don't allow any buildings bigger than 4 stories. Everything is very conservative. Everything is just, heavy mass, small apertures. Apertures are set back.
Yeah.
The clothing, although very restrictive clothing policy, the clothing itself is not restrictive.
Yeah.
Very light, airy,
So you're hitting a thing for me here, right? So I had a discussion with someone about climate change. I actually think the climate is changing. What I don't believe is that you can stop it changing. I believe you've got to adapt. Adaptation is the story of human growth. What you saw in Indonesia was adaptation to local conditions.
Yeah, yeah.
They weren't trying to change it. We're trying to do that in the West by air conditioning the crap out of everything, right? It ain't working. Got news for you. It's not going well.
No, I remember getting online debates. I'm talking about HVAC, and then someone came in and started to argue, well, why don't you guys use R, like refrigeration? Refrigeration saved North America, saving the world. And I'm just like, refrigeration has created a ticking time bomb.
So there is a new book out, and I'm thinking of making an approach to the person who wrote it. I can't remember what her name was. She called it the Refrigeration Industrial Complex. So clearly I'm in on that because that's my riff, right? Yeah. And her thing is about how it's enabled societies to grow, because it's all about the food chain, actually, right? Why does Arizona exist? Because we can air condition it, right? And you can store the food and it doesn't.
Medicine.
And her thing was, this ain't going away. This is only getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So you've got to adapt to that reality, right? Build better logistics, better food management. It was really interesting. I heard her on a podcast. So I'm going to try and reach out to her and see if she'll come on and talk about it, because, it's part of that whole, I hate the word sustainability, ESG, sustainability, carbon thing, right? That is a big number in that whole system, right? That you can't get rid of unless you want to fucking not eat.
I don't know if people would take that as an option.
Yeah. So, we focus on houses, which are important because everyone uses them, but it's just one part of the whole thing, right? Where you draw that boundary, like food supply and being able to refrigerate and transport it, man, that is everything.
Yeah.
Right? Not half the cities in America would just not exist if it wasn't for that.
Yep. Totally.
Right? No one gives it a thought. Single point of failure, man. Right? Turn the power off.
Well, yeah. I mean, you think you're driving down the road and you see those big refrigerated trucks.
Yeah.
Right. That engine fails. And the refrigerator fails. All that, whatever's in the back of that truck, is wasted.
Absolutely, man. And do that at scale. That them numbers add up real quick, man.
Yeah.
So I'm going to reach out to her, but I think we do need to get Nate back for part 2, because I think we need to do a little bit more on residential, because it is such a big market. It's sort of like hides in plain sight, really, because you're in and out of them all the time. You don't give it a thought, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Totally. So anyway, that's it for me. I think he was good. Obviously, Whisperer. I approve of that name. And we'll get him back for part 2 later in the year, I think.
Yeah. Sounds good.
All right, man. So listen, have a good summer.
Yeah, you too, Adam. All right. Cheers, man.
All right. See ya.
Bye now.
Bye.
Bye now.
You've been listening to the Edifice Complex podcast with Adam Muggleton and Robert Bean. To access show notes for this episode, visit edificecomplexpodcast.com. If you have enjoyed this podcast, please leave us a review on iTunes. See you next time.